Hi, Ikuya. My name is Ellen, and I'll be correcting these essays for you. Let's take a look and see what you did in your first set. This is about schools and whether they should be entertaining. Here's what you said. Okay. Entertainment, singular here, at school has been a controversial issue among societies. I believe the debate centers on the benefits of the fun-filled education. Get rid of the rather than the difficulty of implementing. This essay will analyze the issue and use examples from UK research, get rid of the, to demonstrate points and prove arguments. Okay. Um, so I like the language here. Okay, yeah, there were a couple places where you had a couple of little issues, little grammatical things. For me, though, the issue is that I don't really know your position. Okay. What do I mean? I mean, they've asked you a very specific question. Which do you agree with? That they should be more entertaining or that schools really just need to educate? You told us where the debate centers. So you didn't really tell us what your position is on the question. It feels like you're answering something related, but not the question that you were asked. Now, this is important because I want you to take a look at the band descriptors for task achievement and see what it says in band 7. It says presents a clear position throughout the response. Throughout means from the beginning to the end. So that means your position and where you stand on the question they've asked you, that needs to be clear from that introduction. It's the easiest, clearest way to do it. All right, let's keep going. Firstly, schools would be more attractive. Now, your grammar here is interesting. Schools would be when. How about this? Schools are more attractive when they introduce more entertaining curriculums. Or schools would be more attractive if they introduced more attractive curriculums. Okay, so a couple of different options for you here. This is because education with entertainment, so-called edutainment approach, I would have said the so-called because it's a specific example, a specific approach, might make the students more excited about upcoming classes. For example, a report from Cambridge University showed edutainment made students more comfortable so they could get clarifications as soon as they were confused about something in the lecture. Therefore, edutainment should be introduced to schools to intrigue students to study. Okay. Secondly, on the other hand, there are some hurdles to bringing ing here. Okay, this is due to the fact that some equipment and teacher skills are required to install entertainment in schools. Take, for example, no S here, a UK government report. All right, the grammar is off here. I know a lot of students like to use this take, for example, but it does create a little difficulty here. Let's try it a little differently. So, for example, let's just leave it like that. Or for instance, since you already used for example here, for instance, a UK government report suggested that 10% of, no, 10% higher budget, that would be better, is necessary for some fun for the education, namely computer games. Also, the same report pointed out that over 50% of teachers felt unconfident to introduce amusement into their classrooms because they have not, no comma here, because they've not been taught in that way. No, because they were not taught in that way when they were students. Thus, it is difficult to ignore obstacles for edutainment. Okay, so honestly, I don't feel like this paragraph is relevant. Is it relevant to your position? Yes. Is it relevant to the question they asked you? Not entirely. Okay. They asked you about two separate issues. They asked you obviously about schools, whether they should be more entertaining. And then what about this idea of just solely and only educating our children? Okay. With no games, with no toys or whatever. So you could have talked about that if you thought there was some value to that opinion. But I really don't feel like you were asked to answer this. Yes, you talked about it in your position, but they didn't ask you about it. And so I don't think this was particularly relevant. I think an examiner would probably say it was an off topic response. I mean, yes, the other part is, but this is kind of just going off in a different direction. So you're probably wondering, okay, Ellen, well, what could I have done here? Well, you could have done a ton of things. So you talked about schools being more attractive. Another thing you could have done is you could have said what else is beneficial when students have this type of entertainment. Maybe the benefit is that students' learning retention improves and that when they learn things with fun. So, you could say that educational tests showed that students that were taught in a entertainment filled environment retained or scored 60% better on standardized tests than their counterparts that did not have this type of entertainment in school. So that's something you could have done here. Okay. And you could have developed your paragraph like that. Alternatively, you could have had a paragraph where you said, the validity of this idea that schools should just be educational. Maybe there is some validity to that. Maybe there is something to be said for that argument. But if that's the case, you also needed to explain that up here in your introduction. All right, so to conclude from the examples and arguments given, I firmly agree educational institutions should be more enjoyable, although I cannot help admitting there remain difficulties in cost and human resources. Okay. In the future, as the demand for creativity without that the more educated. Okay, fine. So I like it, but again, you were including elements that should not have been here. So I'm going to ask you to get rid of them and just stick to what you were asked and not do something like this. Okay, so let me take a look at your second essay. All right, so teaching priority between playing and reading has been a controversial issue in Western societies. I believe this superiority depends on what age, not aging, age group of students we are discussing. This essay will analyze the issue and use examples from some reports, demonstrate points, and prove arguments. Okay, so check it out. If I did not have this in front of me, so let's say I did not have the prompt, that's what we call that. If I did not have the prompt in front of me, I would not know what this essay was about. I understand that it's about teaching and playing and reading, but teaching priority between playing and reading has been a controversial issue. Superiority. Okay, so what about enjoyable activities? There's like nothing here. There's nothing about skills. There's nothing about, did you mention creativity? No. So this feels to me like it's, again, not totally related. Like it's maybe kind of peripherally related to the topic, but not really in a close focused way. And that's what I want to see from you. Let's take a look at your body paragraphs. Firstly, for young students, the fun activity, okay, get rid of the. Firstly, for fun students, fun activities would help develop students' basic abilities to study. This is because these exercises assist enhancing memory skills, early literacy, and verbal communication. No S. For example, UK institution research shows amusing curriculums build emotional, intellectual, physical, and social skills of the child in ways that cannot be taught through formal classroom instruction. No S. Therefore, in kindergartens and for early primary age children, entertaining programs are largely required. All right, so I definitely feel like you were influenced by the previous essay and you took this from a real like school scope. That's not what is being discussed here. They're talking about doing an enjoyable activity with a child and what skills are developed through the entertaining activity, if creativity is developed, and if these entertaining activities do a better job of developing these skills than reading can. So that's what you're supposed to be talking about here. Okay. It's not necessarily in school. It's not necessarily with the curriculum. Whenever I read this, to my mind and to the mind of most of the students who write this, it's about, at home, what are kids doing, like outside of school. There's nothing really related to school here. All right, let's keep going. Secondly, for senior pupils, reading is strongly required to expand their basic literacy skills. This is because students who are exposed to reading are more likely to do well when they reach their period of formal education. Careful here, look at this. This is because. It's a great way to link two ideas, but try not to repeat it, okay, in your paragraphs. Okay. All right. I really don't want you to use this because you're having some trouble with it. For example, comma. A report from Cambridge University showed that let children what? Reading let children help to use. I don't understand this. Reading let children use their imaginations to explore people, places, time, and events beyond their own experiences, which were all connected to their further academic education. No comma, no S, sorry. Thus, reading would be the first priority for elder learners. All right. I didn't see anything about creativity. We'll talk about that in a minute and what that means. To conclude from the examples and arguments given, I firmly agree that the priority of education is based on the stages of education, okay, which are the junior and the senior one. I don't understand this sentence, I'm afraid. Regarding the former phase, more exciting classes are suitable, whereas the latter needs intensive readings. In the future, both fun activities and in-depth reading would be more applicable for education. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to look at the topic again. Doing an enjoyable activity with a child can develop better skills and more creativity than reading. To what extent do you agree? Okay, so there's nothing about skills here. My understanding of this is when the adult participates in some sort of an activity with a child. Okay, and maybe not even necessarily, maybe just the child, him or herself, doing the enjoyable activity. Okay, but it's not really within a school framework. Okay, there's no mention of school, so to my mind, this is always about like after school activities. Um, so the two things you're supposed to be talking about is better skills and creativity. You know this because there's this and here. So better skills kind of falls into one thing they want you to talk about, and then creativity is a separate thing that they want you to talk about all on its own. And you can tell this because if they didn't, they would have just put it in here, or they would have said like better skills like creativity. Okay, where creativity is an example. They didn't do that. They very specifically said better skills and creativity, which shows you that they really want you to spend time talking about both of them. You can decide which skills, but creativity is one thing you have to talk about. Okay, and then how does the enjoyable activity develop these when you compare it to reading? So there's several different things you have to talk about, okay? The enjoyable activity, skills, and creativity, but there should also be some sort of comparison with reading. So I feel like you kind of missed that, okay? You talked about like exercises, you talked about some skills, yeah. Uh, but again, it was all in like a school framework, and I didn't really feel like that was entirely appropriate. Then I didn't like this, firstly, and secondly, when you were clearly switching sides here. So here you're talking about fun activities, and here you're talking about reading. So it's when you're switching sides, it doesn't make sense to use firstly and secondly. Here, like on the one hand, on the other hand, would have been fine. I don't feel like firstly and secondly are appropriate when you're switching your kind of perspective on this, okay? Okay, and then basic literacy skills, okay. You talked about using their imagination, so maybe it would be a huge stretch for me to say, okay, yeah, here's where we're talking about creativity. Um, but again, I still feel like this needed to be more reflective of what your paragraphs were about. So I still think it needs a little work. Another thing that I want to talk to you about is your development. Take a look at your conclusion. It's almost the same size as your body paragraphs. And to me, that's not such a great thing. You really want to focus on developing your body paragraphs, and your introduction, your conclusion really have very specific roles to fill. Once you fill those roles, you don't have to write anything else. You really just need to just get out of there basically and start, revising and correcting any mistakes and so forth. Um, So yeah, I would have minimized this a little bit. I would have possibly developed your essay a little more. because I think it did stand for that. And I really want you to be careful with some of these grammatical mistakes. Little things, they were pesky things, but there were enough of them. There were enough of them to distract a little bit and to like, kind of keep the flow from flowing for lack of a better word. So it kind of, it created like pauses as I was reading it. So I want you to be careful about that. All right, so this is your first set. You're off to a good start, but I want to see some things from you. So go ahead, correct these, return them to us, send us that new set of essays together with this, and don't forget to add to your error list. Okay, so good luck, and I'll be waiting for your next